this weekend, so thanks for that. I appreciate it. It's nice to be loved. For me today, there's just really this panel and then autographs, and then I am all done. But I hope to see you guys around at maybe some other conventions or such. Hi, I'm Tiffany, and next month I will have been working in the anime industry for 19 years. That sounds really scary when I say that now. Wow, and also makes me feel so old. Anyway, but obviously, I started out voice acting. That was my entree into the acting, into the whole anime thing. And within about a year of that, I was actually approached to start doing some script work, but actually for subtitles, which sounds like, what? But sometimes they need a little bit of polishing. So really it was just me kind of, tweaking the translation a little bit, just kind of cleaning it up, And I like to say that brevity is the soul of subtitles, because you don't have time to read a lot of really waxing poetic in the subtitles. People don't read as fast as they hear. So I did that. I did that for a couple of years, working on. I'll tell you, if you're looking for my name in the credits, you probably won't find it, because most of the stuff that I worked on scripts for, it was hentai. Yes, it was. So I'm not going to tell you what my pseudonym was that I used for that, but in every episode, wow, how old are the people in this room? Okay, yeah. Anyway, I tried to find other ways of saying, I'm putting it in now. There you go, that's a challenge, because I'm sure that happens all the time. That's like a common phrase that people say, which just goes to show you that most of the animators are probably virgins. So, excellent. So I did that for a couple of years. I did work on some shows like Mayuki-chan and Wonderland and Fire Emblem, Suikoden. It's like stuff like they're going, what the hell is she talking about? No one has heard of those things. Okay, woo, yeah, it was based on a video game. Tokyo, the Last Megalopolis, which was live action and it was horror. And I really don't like horror films. I'm super squeamish, and so, like people are getting stabbed and impaled and there's blood and everything, and it's really hard to work on a film when you don't want to watch it. I found that that's true. Anyway, but they got in-house people to do all the subtitling stuff, so I was kind of put out of a job on that. That was okay. But right around the end of that time, like around 97 or so, I started working on this show, Neon Genesis Evangelion. And it turns out Asuka was raised in Germany. She speaks German. Wunderbar, ich kann auch Deutsch sprechen. So that worked out well for me. And whenever in the script there was some place that Asuka had to speak in German, it fell to me to write all of the German dialogue for her. So that was really my first little foray into writing any dialogue for dubbing. It wasn't in English, it was actually in German. But the process is still the same, it doesn't matter, the language. And so that was my first little taste of it. And I got paid nothing for doing that, by the way. All I asked for was like, well, could I get a credit? So anybody who actually watched the credits, and I know none of you do, but it's in there, additional German dialogue, Tiffany Grant. So I just asked, could I get my name in the credits? That's all I want. So I got that, and that was awesome. Now we did add in a little bit of extra German dialogue here and there, and that was in the Japanese originally. I just thought it would be fun for her that if she kind of flew off the handle, that she would start yelling things in German. And we weren't really saying anything different than what she actually should have been saying. It's just that we did it in German, and it was more fun for me that way. And so I got a big kick out of that. And, it's worth pointing out that when a show is done in another language, it can be referred to, usually professionally, as ADR, additional dialogue recording, dubbing, looping, it's all the same thing. It's just you're taking an existing film or a TV show that was in, it's already finished, and it was done in one language, and then you're going to create a new language version for that. So it doesn't matter if you're taking a French show and doing a German version of it or whatever. It's all done exactly the same way, where a special script is written for it so that it's going to pretty much fit the timing of the mouth movements, and then you record it one person at a time. So when I get asked a lot about, what's it like working with Vic Mignogna? I mean, how can you contain yourself? I contain myself. It's okay, don't worry about that. Anyway, no, I actually don't ever work in the studio with the other actors. Well, on some extremely rare occasions I have, but generally what it is you have one actor in a recording booth, and then in the outer part of the studio you've got a director and you've got a sound engineer. And generally speaking, that's usually all of the people who are there. So that's who you're working with. And I've had a lot of people over the years, obviously, gazillions of them ask me about, how do I get to be a voice actor? Answer is, I got no freaking clue. Anyway, and then a smaller subset of people asking me about anime, like script writing. And that's even, wow, I have less of a clue as to how you do that, because really it's mostly people who are already working in the industry. There's a certain experience that you get. I've heard Taliesin Jaffe, who works in the industry in LA, refer to it as booth experience. And he and I were doing a panel about this topic one time, and he said you can really tell as an actor or director you're working on a show that if the script was written by someone who has booth experience or not. Because the stuff with the script will just be wildly off, You have to take all these things into account when you're writing the script. Well, for one thing, it should be, the dialogue should be about the right amount of time. Now, obviously, we can't really match the mouths. For one thing, when you're talking about anime, TV series, those are not phonetically animated. They're not made to match any kind of human mouth position. They just gotta go. Sometimes they're in the shape of a circle or a square, sometimes they're triangular. I mean, they're not actually shapes of actual humans' mouths. So it's just like, if it kind of starts and ends at the right time, awesome. How the hell do you know if it's gonna start and end at the right time? Well, the answer is you have to actually perform it. And that's part of that whole booth experience thing, is the only way to tell if the dialogue in this script is going to match with this show that you're working on is that you have to actually perform every single line out loud as you imagine it would be performed by the actors performing it in the studio. I mean, there's no other way to tell if that's going to fit. I mean, if it's just like bloop bloop, like one or two little mouth flaps, well, you can pretty well gauge how that's going to go, but a lot of times, they keep flippity-flapping for a while, and you have to actually perform that out loud. And you also have to pay attention to a lot of things like, did they kind of pause there for just a second in the middle of that line? So you've got to account for where that little hitch is in that dialogue and make sure that, your sentence is phrased accordingly so that you can naturally put a pause in that sentence. Without it sounding weird. And that's, often a mistake that I've seen with people who, don't have that much booth experience trying to knock out those scripts. And in fact, I had an interesting discussion one time with a guy who had a Hollywood background. He had worked in Hollywood for, 20 or more years working on big-time TV shows back in the 70s. I think he was working on stuff like Starsky and Hutch and, all those cop shows they did back then. But he was writing original scripts for live-action shows, and it's just a completely different thing. And so I guess his idea was, hey, I'm a professional script writer with such and such decades of experience writing TV shows. This should just be a breeze. And it's really not, because for one thing, everything's already done, so you don't get to invent what's happening in the story. I mean, what's happening in the story is already what's happening. So that whole level of creativity taken out of it can in a lot of ways be very stifling to a creative person, because you think, oh, it'd be so much more interesting if the story was about this instead, but you don't really have that option. You know, it's about whatever it's about. And the stuff that's happening, well, there it is. It's already been animated. So the characters have the expressions that they have, and these actions are happening, and they talk for this amount of time. And so it's extremely constrained. So it's a really weird way of focusing creativity to work in that with all of those kinds of restrictions. It really is, but you still want to try to turn out a show that's going to be entertaining for your intended audience. So you know, all those things taken into account, it's challenging. So sometimes it can be really satisfying, but a lot of it's pretty tedious, to be honest. So for me, and I think for a lot of people, there's a fairly standard kind of process to how this is done. Is usually, first of all, I watch the show. It sounds pretty straightforward, but that's usually my first step, is watching the show. Generally speaking, for me, well, every show that I've worked on has had a finite number of episodes. So obviously, if you're working on something like you know, Sergeant Frog or One Piece or something that's, you know, ongoing and it's got hundreds of episodes, it's just, you can't watch it, it's not even done. But if you're working on something that's hundreds and hundreds of episodes, well, it's not really applicable, but you can do research and you could at least watch some of it. But so for me, you know, it's about watching whatever it is, 13 or 26 or, you know, 50 episodes or whatever, watching that whole thing to see where the story's going. Because if I'm supposed to be in charge of the scripts, I have to know where the story's going. And in that vein, that gives me an idea of what the overall concept is of the show, the intent of the show, so I can keep that foremost in my mind at all times, is thinking about, you know, what's the original intent of this show? Is it a comedy? Is it a drama? Is it horror? Is it, you know, whatever the themes are of the show, making sure those themes are fulfilled. So, you know, and then taking that down to a micro level of, you know, each scene, what's the intent of this scene, what drives each of these characters. And much in the same way that, like, when you read a book, after you've kind of established the characters and you get into a story and you're reading it, you don't have to see, you know, Edward said or Bella said or whatever. You know who's talking or who's sparkling or whatever. You know whose dialogue that is. Well, hopefully you would be able to achieve that in your anime dubbing script, or in any script for that matter. I mean, the dialogue of the character should indicate who is speaking. Everyone can't sound exactly the same. We don't all speak the same. We have different colloquialisms or different manners of speaking. Some people speak more formally than others, you know, etc.